Imagine this: a young man leaves his home, leaving everything behind. He challenges the most important part of his life, thinking he knows where he is going. But fate brings him to his knees. And when he decides to return, he faces a moment he will never forget. What is hidden in this story? Why can one person forgive everything, while another cannot? And what does this mystery mean for each of us? Watch until the end, because the conclusion of this parable reveals something amazing that might touch your life too. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss more stories that make you think and inspire you. Now, let's dive into this incredible tale, full of mystery and revelations. The warm sunrise covered the vineyards with golden light. The air was fresh and filled with the smell of earth and grass. An old man, the father of 2 sons, stood under the shade of a tree, looking closely at his younger son. The young man, full of energy and determination, stared at him with an unwavering expression. "Father, I want my share of the inheritance." "I can't stay here anymore," he said firmly, his voice almost cold. The words hit the father like a bolt of lightning. He stood silent, trying to process the request. His younger son, the child he had cherished since birth, was now asking for something more than home and family work. "Don't you like your life here?" the father asked softly. "I don't want this routine. I want freedom. I want to see the world. I want to live my own way," the son replied, with ambition burning in his eyes. The father took a deep breath. His heart was breaking. He knew this choice would bring pain, but he understood that he couldn't force his son to stay. Everyone must walk their own path, even if that path leads through mistakes and hardships. The older son stood nearby, watching the conversation. His face showed irritation. He couldn't understand how his brother, who had grown up with love and care, could be so ungrateful. Sitting at the wooden table in the cool room, the father divided his property. Drops of sweat rolled down his forehead, not from physical work, but from the weight of the decision. Every piece of land, every coin, he had worked for years to save for his sons. Now he had to give it away, knowing his younger son would spend it recklessly. At sunrise, the younger son left home. Over his shoulder, he carried a bag filled with gold and silver. His steps were confident, his gaze focused forward. The father stood at the gate, watching him. The young man didn't look back, not even once. Dust from the road rose behind him in the morning light. "He'll come back," the old man whispered. His voice was full of hope, but the tears running down his cheeks revealed deep sadness. On the horizon, the sun rose higher, lighting up the vineyards, which now seemed empty and desolate. The older son stood off to the side, his arms crossed, watching his father. "Why did you let him leave? He doesn't deserve this inheritance," he said bitterly. The father silently turned and walked back into the house, but his gaze lingered on the road where his younger son had disappeared. The city greeted him with noise, music, and bright lights. The younger son found himself in an entirely new world. Here, no one asked questions, no one judged him. The coins in his bag attracted attention, and his smile made him the center of attention. He spent money easily, as if it would never run out. Golden cups of wine replaced one another, tables overflowed with food. Every evening was a celebration, and he was always surrounded by people eager to enjoy his wealth. They called him a friend, though he had known these people for only a few days. At first, he felt happy. The freedom he had dreamed of had finally become real. He could buy anything he wanted, do anything he wanted, and no one could stop him. But beneath all this luxury was an emptiness he didn't notice. Weeks turned into months, and the bag of gold began to empty. One morning, waking up in a messy room, he realized he had only a few coins left. Things got worse when a famine hit the country. Prices rose, food became scarce, and his former friends disappeared as quickly as they had come. No one offered him help. His pride, which had kept him from thinking about home, began to crumble under the weight of despair. Desperate for work, he turned to a local farmer, who gave him the dirtiest and most humiliating job, feeding pigs. For a Jewish man, this was especially shameful, as pigs were considered unclean animals. Standing in the mud, he looked at the trough where the pigs were eating. The food meant for them looked incredibly tempting. He kept his hands behind his back, resisting the urge to reach for it. Hunger tore at his body, but even more, it tore at his soul. He thought of home. In his mind, he pictured the warm table covered with bread and wine. He saw his father, calm and confident, and the servants who were always well-fed and content. And then, a wave of shame washed over him. How could he have fallen so low? He, the son of a respected man, stood among pigs, envying them. Even the servants in my father's house live better than this, he muttered through clenched teeth. His face twisted with pain, but a spark of hope appeared in his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he felt direction. He would return. But how could he? How could he look his father in the eye after everything he had done? As he slowly wrestled with these thoughts, one idea became clear. He must ask for forgiveness. If his father refused to take him back as a son, he would beg to be made a servant. With this thought, he stood up. His clothes were filthy, his body weak, but in his heart, a new determination was born. He gave the pigs one last glance, took a deep breath, and took the first step toward home. The road home was long and hard. His feet, covered in dust and cracks, barely moved forward. On the horizon, he could already see his father's house. The younger son's heart tightened with fear and anxiety. He didn't know how he would be received. Would his father be angry, judge him, or, even worse, reject him? As he got closer, he noticed a figure standing by the gate. It was his father. The old man, whose shoulders had dropped from years of waiting and worry, was looking into the distance as if expecting someone. And then their eyes met. "That's him," the father whispered. His heart skipped a beat and then began to race as if he were young again. He dropped the cane he was leaning on and started running. The younger son froze, shocked. He had never seen his father run before. It was unexpected, even strange for someone his age, but in that movement was all the power of love. When the father reached him, he didn't say a word. His embrace was strong, almost painful, but it was filled with so much warmth that the son couldn't hold back his tears. "Father, forgive me," he began, his voice trembling. "I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father didn't let him finish. He held him even tighter. "You've come back, my son. And that's all that matters," he whispered. The father looked toward the house and called out for everyone to hear. "Quickly! Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet." The servants froze in surprise but didn't hesitate to obey. They rushed to carry out the orders, while the older son came out of the house, frowning at the commotion. Meanwhile, the younger son stood, overwhelmed by what was happening. He hadn't expected to be welcomed like this. Every movement of his father, every smile, filled the son's heart with warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. When the servants brought the robe, the father personally placed it on his son's shoulders. It was soft and warm, a symbol of restoring his honor. The ring on his finger meant he was part of the family again. "Kill the fattened calf," Today, we celebrate. This son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and has been found. The father's voice rang out with joy and triumph. The younger son wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. For the first time in a long while, he felt at home. He felt loved, not for what he had done, but simply for who he was, despite all his mistakes. As the smell of roasted meat began to fill the courtyard and the celebration began, he looked up at his father. There was no fear in his eyes now, only gratitude. But beyond the celebration, in the shadows of the vineyards, the older son stood. His face was dark, and his heart was filled with anger. The older brother stood at the edge of the vineyard, watching the celebration from a distance. The sounds of music and laughter grew louder, and it irritated him. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. How could they rejoice for someone who had wasted everything and abandoned their family in such a difficult time? When a servant approached to invite him to the celebration, the older brother frowned. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to hide his anger. "Your father has ordered a feast. Your brother has returned, and he said this should be a great celebration," the servant answered cheerfully. The older brother frowned even more. "For my brother, who wasted all his inheritance on foolish things and came back with nothing, there's a feast, but for me, who stayed here all this time, I got nothing," he said sharply. The servant hesitated, unsure how to respond. The older brother slowly walked toward the house but didn't go inside. He stopped at the door, refusing to enter. Soon, his father came out, immediately recognizing the anger in his son's heart. "Son, why won't you come in?" the father asked gently. "I have served you for years. I worked on your land and didn't disobey a single command. And what did I get for it? No feasts, no celebration with my friends. But this one, who wasted everything, comes home, and you throw a party for him. Why?" His words were bitter, almost like an accusation. The father stepped closer, looking him in the eye. His gaze wasn't stern but filled with softness and understanding. "My son, you have always been with me, and everything I have is yours. But we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost and has been found," the father said calmly, his voice full of wisdom. The older brother looked away, trying to make sense of his father's words. His bitterness was strong, but he began to see that his father viewed things differently. The father saw the younger son's return not only as forgiveness but as the restoration of the family. "You have always been here," the father continued. "Haven't you ever felt that I value you? I don't need to throw a feast to show you how important you are to me. But now your brother has come back. This is what I prayed for every day. This is a joy that cannot be ignored." These words softened the anger in the older brother's heart. He looked at the house, at the light streaming from its windows, and at the people rejoicing. Maybe the father was right. Maybe forgiveness and joy really were more important than his resentment. But taking a step toward reconciliation wasn't so easy. The story of the prodigal son and his older brother is still relevant today because, at some point, all of us find ourselves in one of these roles. We might be like the younger son, who made mistakes, took the wrong path, and eventually realized his guilt. Maybe we felt the fear of returning to our loved ones or to God, thinking we wouldn't be accepted. But as this parable shows, love and forgiveness are always waiting for us. On the other hand, we might be like the older brother, angry at those who were forgiven but didn't deserve it. Maybe we look at others' mistakes and wonder, why do they get forgiveness while my efforts go unnoticed? But the key lesson of this parable is the power of forgiveness. We live in a world where judging others has become commonplace. Social media, the news, and even our own thoughts are often filled with criticism. But if we learn to forgive, we begin to see people the way God sees them, not perfect, but valuable. How often do conflicts in our families continue because we refuse to forgive? How often do we hold on to grudges that keep us from living freely? The parable of the prodigal son reminds us that everyone deserves a second chance. It's a lesson not only for the younger son but also for the older. Love and the joy of reconciliation are always more important than bitterness and resentment. Like the Father in this story, God waits for each of us. He is ready to embrace us with open arms, despite our mistakes, and help us start anew. The only question is, are we ready to take the first step? Or, if we're in the place of the older brother, are we willing to let go of our grudges and share in the joy of restoring those who return? This story is not just a parable from the Bible. It's a challenge to each of us, to learn to forgive, to love, and to value every moment we have with those we care about. The story of the prodigal son is more than just a parable. It's a reminder that no matter what mistakes we've made, there's always a chance to return. There's always someone waiting for us with an open heart. What does this story mean to you? Write in the comments what it says about your life. Maybe it made you reflect on your relationships or your own path. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like. It helps us share these inspiring messages with more people. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new incredible stories that can change your view of the world. Thank you for being with us, and see you in the next video.